Good day, grade 12s. I hope you have practiced your profit positions and you're confident with doing the calculations and identifying the area for total revenue, total cost, and total profit. Also, very often in section B, they just ask you to identify what type of profit. So you must be able to identify the type of profit just by looking at the graph. And as I said yesterday, the way that we do that is by looking at the position of the average cost curve in relation to the average revenue curve. So today we're looking at the short-term and long-term equilibrium of the industry and of the firm. So yesterday I explained three different types of profit situations: economic profit, economic loss, normal profit. Now, these three profit positions or conditions are only applicable to the short term for perfect markets. In the short term, it means the factors of production are fixed, meaning we cannot move them around. We cannot use more of our capital, we cannot employ more people, etc. Now, in a perfect market, the reason that different profit can only be achieved in the short term is because there's freedom of entry and exit. So in the long term, the market is always going to merge towards the normal profit position. So it will make more sense as soon as I start using the graphs to explain it. But basically, in the short term, if the perfect market is earning an economic profit, entrepreneurs will recognize this in that business, and what will they do? They will open up businesses in that industry. So if we think of that, what will happen then is in the market, the supply will increase. If your supply increases, the market price will go down, and that will then mean that only a normal profit will be made. If in the short term there's economic losses, what will happen is those businesses will recognize that they're making an economic loss, they will close their doors, supply will decrease, the market price will also then increase, and the remaining businesses in that industry will then be making a normal profit. So in the long term, where our factors of production are variable, it then means that in a perfect market situation, only normal profit is made. Also, if we think about it, we must realize that each individual business either experiences economies of scale or diseconomies of scale. So any business will start on a small scale. They will produce only a small amount of items. What will happen then is when they are successful, they will grow their business, they will expand, and then they will experience economies of scale, meaning that the unit costs are going to be reduced. So it costs less to produce each individual product as they grow bigger and bigger. This only applies up to a certain point of production. So up to certain quantities, costs are going to be reducing. Then there's going to have to be a large input of capital, and then your costs will be increasing. Then the business will start experiencing diseconomies of scale. For example, if a business owns a factory, the maximum capacity of that factory might be 100,000 products. So up to 100,000 products, that business is going to be experiencing economies of scale. So the unit costs are going to decrease. Once they get to 100,000 products, they're going to have to either expand that factory, buy new machinery, etc., and then it's going to lead to diseconomies of scale. It's going to become more expensive to produce. And so that pattern will continue throughout time. So let's have a look at. Okay, so first looking at the long-term equilibrium of the industry. Please remember it's a perfect market, so equilibrium price is determined by supply and demand. So let's say you've got your original demand curve and your original supply curve. Equilibrium price is at P1. At a price of P1, the individual businesses are making economic profit. What does that mean? That means that other entrepreneurs will recognize this, more businesses will open, the supply will increase, which means your supply curve now becomes S1. This means we have a new lower market price. So at the lower market price, if businesses are still making an economic profit, more businesses will open, and that means that the price will continue to lower in the long run until the market price is at such a point that only normal profit is being made. If we look at it the opposite way around, so let's say your original supply curve is at S1 and businesses are making an economic loss, then that means that businesses will start to shut down. The supply curve would then move inwards to S, and that means that you have a higher market price. And that adjustment would continue, businesses would keep shutting down until, in the long run, there's only a normal profit being made. So they like to ask this question in the paragraph questions. So they ask you to draw a graph and then to explain it. So just explain the relationship between the supply and the market price. So if business is open, supply increases, market price decreases, eventually normal profit will be reached. If economic loss is being made, businesses will close, supply will decrease, market price will increase, and therefore normal profit will also be made in the long run. So please remember, very important about perfect markets, in the long run, only normal profit can be made. Okay, so if we look at the long-term equilibrium of an individual business, please remember it follows on from the previous graph. The long-term equilibrium of an individual business. If we look here at a market price of P1, for instance, and your short-term average cost and your short-term marginal cost, the business is making economic profit. As long as a business is making economic profit, they're going to attempt to produce more and more to make more profit. And obviously the supply is going to increase, which is going to decrease the market price. Each individual business will eventually settle their production at a point that is at the lowest of the average cost curve. Sorry, this label was cut off. It's your long-term average cost curve, LAC. Just going to write it in there with a pen. My very neat writing, LAC. So they will always settle at the lowest point of the average cost curve with a market price of P. So in the long run, every single business will be making a normal profit, and that's where the market will settle. If you want to have a look at the explanation in your textbook, the explanation in your textbook is on page 141 until 144, the profits in the short term and the long term. But generally, such a long explanation is not required. You will be asked the 8-mark questions on the short term and long term of the individual business. And generally, it's an 8-mark question, so they will ask you to use the graph. So now how to draw the graph as well as explain it. So drawing the graph will be 4 marks, explaining it will be 4 marks. So you only have to give 2 valid points related to the graph in order to earn your 8 marks. They can also maybe ask it as an additional part in the essay. Then it's a maximum of 10 marks. So now at least 3 points. If you understand the graph and you understand how long-term equilibrium is reached and how profit is achieved, then you'll be able to earn those marks in a test or exam. So very importantly, 2 points that you need to be able to identify on a graph. So be able to tell us at what quantities they are is the shutdown point and the break-even point. So break-even point means the business is neither making a profit or a loss. They are simply able to pay all their fixed and variable costs, and they are not achieving anything extra. This point is basically where normal profit is being made, where your average cost or your average total cost is equal to your average revenue. Your shutdown point is exactly what it says. The business should then shut down. They cannot continue operating, and this is at a point where the business cannot even cover its variable costs. So this is at a point you're going to have to look at the variable costs. They would have to give you extra information, or they would have to give you an extra cost curve. It's going to be shaped, sorry, it will be shaped the same as an average cost curve, except it will be labeled VC for variable costs or TVC for total variable costs. And where your total variable costs are equal to your total revenue, that is where your shutdown point is. Okay, and then lastly, the thing about a perfect market is that there is optimal utilization of the resources, meaning every resource that the business has or that the market has is being used to the best of its ability. And that's also why it's called a perfect market, and that is also why governments and businesses should strive to be in a perfect market or to achieve perfect market situations. So the output is being produced at the lowest possible cost. Remember, as I said, each individual business, they will settle at a production point that is at the lowest of its average cost curves. They will also pay the lowest possible, consumers will pay the lowest possible price. That is because there's a market price and each individual business has no control over that market price, so there's no chance of collusion or price fixing. The price of the product is therefore equal to the opportunity cost, meaning that the consumers can get that same product at the same price anywhere else. So they're not giving up any more than what they have to. And obviously in the long run, the businesses are only making normal profit. So that's it for today. Just make sure you go through your theory and these 2 graphs that I've shown you and that you're able to explain them. And then have a lovely day.